Hey guys, on tonight we're stepping into the shadows, a place where the line between life and death blurs. A realm whispered about in ancient texts and etched into the very stones of forgotten civilizations. You're walking through a graveyard, but not just any graveyard. This one hums with an unnerving silence, the kind that presses in on you, making the hairs on your arms stand up. The moon, a sliver of bone white, casts long, skeletal shadows across weathered headstones. A faint mist coils around your ankles, cold and clammy, as if the earth itself is exhaling its deepest, oldest secrets. You hear a rustle just at the edge of your perception, a sound that isn't wind, but something else. Something that pulls at the thin thread of your comfort, reminding you that sometimes things don't stay buried. Tonight, we're not just talking about monsters. We're talking about the terrifying persistence of human belief in the undead, a belief that has clawed its way out of the earth in countless forms across millennia. And, let's be honest, if any of these ancient horrors actually shambled into your living room right now, you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? And what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your mind conjures images from modern cinema shuffling hordes, insatiable hunger, a world plunged into a chaotic, apocalyptic struggle against reanimated corpses. But before the big screen and graphic novels, before the term zombie even entered your lexicon, cultures across the globe grappled with the terrifying concept of the undead. They weren't always green-skinned shufflers. Sometimes they were spectral figures, vengeful spirits, or even bodies reanimated by dark magic. The common historical fact that underpins this entire journey is that virtually every ancient civilization, across diverse geographies and time periods, developed some form of belief in the possibility of the dead returning to afflict the living. This wasn't a fringe idea, it was a deeply ingrained part of their cosmology, their funerary practices, and their daily fears. Think about the psychological impact of having your ancestors literally present. It would instill a deep sense of continuity, but also a profound awareness of accountability. Every action, every decision, could potentially be observed and judged by those who had come before. This constant spiritual oversight would encourage social conformity and adherence to traditions, because the consequences of straying could be grave, not just from the living, but from the very foundations of your lineage. It's like having your entire family tree watching your every move, and they're not afraid to send you a curse if you step out of line. Imagine yourself in ancient Mesopotamia, Sumer, or Akkad. You live in a mud brick house surrounded by the rhythmic sounds of daily life merchants haggling in the marketplace, scribes meticulously etching cuneiform on clay tablets, the distant murmur of the Euphrates River. But beneath the surface of this bustling life, there's an undercurrent of deep-seated spiritual anxiety. Death isn't just an end, it's a transition, and sometimes that transition goes horribly wrong. The air hangs heavy with the scent of dust and dried reeds, and sometimes the faint metallic tang of fear. The Malquis were not just individual ancestors, they also represented the collective memory and identity of the community, connecting them to their specific lands and historical narratives. Their very presence underscored the legitimacy of rulers and the continuity of lineages. Disturbing them was not just sacrilege, it was an act of political and cultural subversion. For the ancient Mesopotamians, the afterlife was a bleak, dusty place called the Land of No Return, a gloomy realm where the dead subsisted on dust and clay. Not exactly a 5-star resort, is it yet? Even from this dreary underworld, some spirits could escape, or perhaps be forced back. The Akimu was a particularly dreaded type of restless spirit in Mesopotamian belief. These weren't physical, shambling bodies, but rather the disembodied spirits of the dead who, for various reasons, couldn't find peace in the underworld. They were like angry ghosts, driven by malevolence and a desire to harm the living. You might hear the faint whisper of a long-dead language on the wind, a ghostly lament that sends shivers down your spine. So, while the Andes didn't give rise to the shambling, brain-eating hordes of modern horror, They offered something far more subtle and deeply integrated into the fabric of life, the benevolent ancestor who, if neglected or wronged, could become a powerful, unseen force of misfortune. A spiritual undead haunting your very existence. You're left with the quiet, persistent hum of the wind through the high mountain passes, and the unsettling thought that even in death, some presences remain, forever watching, forever demanding respect. Why would an Ekemu become restless? Perhaps the deceased wasn't properly buried, their funerary rites neglected, or maybe they died a violent death, their soul clinging to the world with unresolved anger or pain. Some Ekemu were the spirits of those who died alone, unmourned, or without proper offspring to remember them. Imagine dying in a ditch somewhere, no one even noticing you're gone. And then, because of that neglect, you're stuck haunting the living. Talk about holding a grudge. They'd seep into homes through cracks in walls, cause illness, drive people mad, or even manifest as shadowy figures at night, bringing misfortune and dread. You'd probably put extra sealant on your windows if you lived back then. You leave the dizzying heights and ancient, mummified presences of the Andes, feeling the thin air give way to a different kind of warmth, thick with humidity and the scent of salt spray and lush tropical foliage. The sound of distant waves replaces the mountain winds, and beneath your bare feet, you feel warm sand or cool volcanic rock. You are now in the vast, mesmerizing expanse of the Pacific Ocean, among its countless islands, Polynesia, Melanesia, Micronesia, each a unique world, yet often connected by currents of belief and migration. Here, the ocean isn't just a barrier, but a highway, and the ancestors, far from being confined to tombs, were intimately woven into the very fabric of daily life, their power echoing through the living world. The methods used to protect against the Ekemu were as varied as their perceived threats. You'd see incantations whispered, protective amulets worn often depicting benevolent gods or apotropaic figures designed to ward off evil, and elaborate rituals performed by priests or exorcists. The air in the temples would be thick with incense, the rhythmic chanting a desperate plea for protection. Every crack in the wall, every rustle in the dark, could be a sign of an encroaching spiritual threat. It's a bit like trying to keep out mosquitoes, but the mosquitoes are invisible and want to steal your soul. The common historical fact that underpins beliefs across many Pacific Island cultures is that ancestors, particularly chiefs and powerful figures, retained significant spiritual power mana after death, and could actively influence the living world, either benevolently, by providing guidance and prosperity, or malevolently, by causing misfortune or illness if displeased. You feel the gentle sea breeze on your skin, a reminder of the vast open ocean that shaped these islanders' worldviews. Death wasn't an end, but a transformation into a more potent state of being, where the departed could continue to interact with their descendants. It's like your family patriarch, but after he passes, he gains a direct line to the weather gods and also knows exactly when you haven't cleaned your room. Now, let's journey further into the ancient world, across the vast sands to ancient Egypt, a civilization obsessed with death, burial, and the journey to the afterlife. While your modern mind might immediately think of mummies and pharaohs, their beliefs about the undead were far more nuanced than Hollywood's bandaged monsters. For the Egyptians, the goal was not to avoid the dead, but to ensure their peaceful transition and continued well-being in the Duat, the underworld. The elaborate mummification process, the meticulously painted tomb walls, the vast quantities of grave goods all were designed to facilitate this journey and prevent the deceased from becoming a malevolent presence. You can almost smell the ancient spices and resins used in the embalming process, a scent that speaks of preservation and eternal slumber. You might be standing on a pristine beach, watching outrigger canoes glide across crystal-clear lagoons, or deep within a verdant jungle, near a sacred marae, a ceremonial platform. The air is alive with the sounds of exotic birds and the murmur of village life. The respect for ancestors was paramount, not just as a cultural formality, but as a pragmatic necessity. Their wisdom, their power, and their continued influence were essential for successful fishing, bountiful harvests, and victory in tribal conflicts. This belief system created a constant, almost palpable connection to the spiritual realm, where the past was never truly gone. However, Even with all these precautions, sometimes things went awry. The ancient Egyptians believed that the integrity of the body was crucial for the K life force and BA personality, our soul, to reunite and achieve eternal blessedness as an glorious, effective spirit. If the tomb was disturbed, the body desecrated, or the funerary rituals incomplete, the deceased might become a restless dead. These weren't typically reanimated corpses in the modern sense, but rather disgruntled spirits, similar to the Ekamu, who could return to the living world to cause trouble. They might bring illness, bad luck, or even haunt specific individuals, driven by their inability to find peace. It's like your Wi-Fi keeps cutting out on your journey to the afterlife, and you just get really, really frustrated. However, just as in the Andes, this profound connection held a shadow, the fear of the unquiet dead. An ancestor, if not properly honored, if their sacred taboos were violated, or if their remains were disturbed, could become a powerful and dangerous force. These weren't typically reanimated corpses in the classic zombie sense. Instead, the Pacific undead were often powerful spirits Aqua or Aitu in various languages, capable of possessing the living, causing madness, bringing sickness, or creating natural disasters. Their power was immense, their influence insidious, and their displeasure something to be deeply feared. You can almost feel the prickle of unease, knowing that even the most beautiful paradise could harbor unseen dangers. An obscure detail here is the ancient Egyptian concept of the fiend or eater of the dead, often depicted as a monstrous creature known as Ammit. While not an undead entity itself, Ammit lived in the Hall of Ma'at and would devour the hearts of those deemed unworthy during the weighing of the heart ceremony. However, in certain lesser-known spells and folklore, there were hints of fears related to the unworthy dead not being properly consumed by Ammit, or somehow escaping judgment to wander the earth. These souls, stripped of their opportunity for blessedness and denied proper passage, were truly lost and potentially malevolent, a kind of existential zombie, denied a destination and thus eternally adrift. It's like being denied entry to the VIP lounge and being stuck at the airport indefinitely. An obscure detail from certain Pacific Island traditions that directly relates to the undead is the practice of ritually preserving and sometimes carrying the skulls or bones of important ancestors. Not merely as relics, but as active vessels through which the ancestors' mana could be accessed or controlled, occasionally blurring the line between reverence and a cautious engagement with a powerful, potentially restless spirit. Imagine a chief carrying a decorated ancestral skull into battle, believing the ancestor's spirit would lend strength. Or, conversely, imagine the fear if such a skull were stolen or desecrated. It's like having a very fancy, very old, and potentially very angry power bank for spiritual energy. The academic debate surrounding ancient Egyptian beliefs often revolves around the precise distinction between a mere ghost or spirit like the Bey returning to visit, which wasn't necessarily negative and a truly restless or malicious undead entity that posed a threat to the living, and how deeply these beliefs influenced daily funerary practices beyond the well-documented royal tombs. Were the common people as concerned about these vengeful spirits as the pharaohs were about maintaining their eternal glory, and did the fear of the restless dead influence the design of their simpler, less elaborate burials? It's a complex puzzle, trying to piece together the beliefs of an entire civilization from fragments. These preserved remains weren't just symbols, they were conduits. The ancestors' spiritual essence was believed to reside within them, allowing communication, divination, and even protection. But this connection was a double-edged sword. If the ancestor was displeased, that same conduit could become a source of malevolent energy. The fear wasn't of the bone itself walking, but of the immense, contained spiritual power within it, being unleashed in a destructive way. It's like holding a powerful battery, but you're not entirely sure if it's going to power your flashlight or zap your hand. You'd find funerary texts filled with spells and incantations, designed not just to guide the dead, but also to protect the living from the dead. There were even rituals where living individuals would attempt to communicate with a restless spirit, hoping to appease it or understand its grievances. Almost like a ghostly therapy session. Imagine sitting down with a long-dead Egyptian, trying to figure out why they're still hanging around your granary. Look, dude, I get it. You miss your cat, but can you please stop spoiling the grain? The academic debate that frequently crops up when discussing ancestor practices in Oceania is whether the reverence for ancestral remains, including the handling and occasional manipulation of bones, indicates a belief in a form of literal reanimation or simply a profound symbolic connection to a living and active spiritual presence that never truly leaves its terrestrial ties. Were islanders truly worried about Grandpa's skull floating off on its own? Or was it more about his spiritual wrath being channeled through it? It's like trying to discern if a family heirloom is just a sentimental object, or if it's actually haunted. The line between material and spiritual agency is often very fluid in these contexts. Moving westward, across the Mediterranean Sea, you arrive in the cradle of Western civilization, ancient Greece and Rome. Their beliefs about the dead were, in many ways, less optimistic than the Egyptians, often depicting a shadowy, bleak underworld where most souls simply faded into an insubstantial existence. Yet, even from the classical underworld, some individuals could return, or refuse to depart, becoming what we might broadly categorize as undead. You can almost hear the soft lapping of waves on the Aegean coast, a deceptive tranquility that hides tales of spectral horror. Consider the dynamic environment of the Pacific. Islands are vulnerable to tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, and the unpredictable bounty of the ocean. In a world where survival was so reliant on these natural forces, interpreting them through the lens of ancestral influence was a logical step. A sudden typhoon, a failed fishing season, or an inexplicable illness could all be attributed to the displeasure of Akua, or to spirits who were unmoored and causing chaos. This environmental fragility constantly reinforced the need to appease and honor the dead. You can almost feel the powerful, unpredictable ocean currents, mirroring the unseen spiritual forces. In Greek mythology, there were figures like the Vrikolakas, a type of vampire-like undead often associated with specific individuals who died an unholy death, committed grave sins, or were excommunicated. These were more than just ghosts. They sometimes retained a physical form, bringing plague, feeding on the living, and causing general mayhem. Imagine a distant relative who just won't leave, but instead of just eating all your food, they also drain your life force. You'd probably start locking your doors at night. Specific islands had their own unique takes on the undead. In some Polynesian cultures, there were legends of Tupapaku, malevolent ghosts of the recently deceased, especially those who died violently or were improperly buried. These Tupapaku could linger near their bodies, haunting their families and causing disturbances. In other traditions, sorcerers were believed to be able to reanimate corpses, though often for specific, limited purposes, such as fetching items or guarding places, rather than creating a widespread plague of the undead. This isn't your typical zombie outbreak. It's more like a highly specialized spiritual labor force. The Vrikolakas was often believed to be bloated and ruddy, a grotesque parody of life. They would walk the earth, creating noise, moving objects, and ultimately bringing death to those they encountered. The fear was palpable in rural communities, where strange occurrences were quickly attributed to the presence of such a malevolent entity. The very air seems to thicken with the dread of the unseen, yet physically present, horror. The concept of tapu taboo, widespread throughout Polynesia, played a crucial role in managing the sacred and profane, and by extension, the living and the dead. Violating a tapu could anger the gods, or more directly, the ancestors, leading to severe spiritual retribution. This fear of retribution, of falling out of favor with powerful, unseen entities, was a constant motivator for adhering to tradition and treating sacred objects and places with the utmost respect. You feel the weight of countless generations of tradition, pressing down on you like a spiritual blanket. Roman beliefs, often influenced by Greek traditions, also featured restless spirits known as lemures or larvae. These were the unquiet dead, spirits of those who died violently, tragically, or without proper burial rites. Unlike the benevolent household spirits Lares, the lemures were malevolent, haunting specific places or individuals, bringing misfortune and even madness. The Romans even had a specific ritual, the Lemuria festival, held in May, where the head of the household would perform rites to appease these restless spirits, spitting black beans and clanging brass pots to drive them away. It's like your annual spring cleaning, okay, but for ghosts. Definitely more effective than just vacuuming. Think about the psychological impact of knowing your ancestors are constantly watching, constantly present. It could instill a powerful sense of community and lineage, but also a deep fear of social transgression. Every action you took, every disrespectful word, could potentially offend not just your living elders, but the powerful spirits of those who came before. This constant spiritual accountability would enforce social order and perpetuate customs. Because the consequences of angering a mana-infused ancestor could be dire. It's like living in a reality TV show where all your deceased relatives are the judges, and they can literally cause your crops to wither if they don't like your acting. The fear of these restless dead drove many funerary practices. Bodies were carefully washed and prepared. Coins were often placed in the mouth of the deceased to pay Karin, the ferrymen of the underworld, for passage across the river Styx. This wasn't just a pleasant custom. It was a desperate attempt to ensure the soul reached its proper destination and didn't linger. You can almost feel the chill of the underworld's gate, the cold, unforgiving current of the Styx. The elaborate burial practices, varying widely from simple interments to complex rituals involving temporary burial, bone cleaning, and secondary interment in sacred caves or platforms, were all designed to ensure the peaceful transition of the deceased and the proper channeling of their mana. A disturbed grave, a desecrated bone, or a neglected ancestor could unleash a powerful spiritual imbalance, bringing misfortune not just to an individual but to the entire community. An obscure detail from Roman belief relates to the materia magica found in ancient graves. Lead curse tablets, defixiones, and voodoo dolls, sigilla that were buried specifically to bind spirits, sometimes to compel them to do the bidding of the living, or more commonly, to prevent a troublesome dead person from rising. These weren't just about warding off the undead. They were about actively controlling them, or ensuring they stayed put. It's like putting a very specific, magical do not disturb sign on a grave, but it's etched in lead and might try to make the ghost do your bidding. Consider the role of specific places in the island landscape. Volcanoes, sacred caves, ancient trees, and specific rocks could all be seen as resting places or conduits for ancestral spirits. These were places to be approached with reverence and caution, as to disturb them was to risk angering the powerful Akua within. The very landscape was imbued with spiritual presence, a living, breathing testament to the power of the departed. You hear the distant roar of a volcanic vent, a sound that could easily be interpreted as the voice of an ancient, powerful entity. The existence of such artifacts speaks volumes about the active engagement ancient people had with their beliefs about the dead. It wasn't passive fear, it was proactive magic. They were trying to manipulate the spiritual forces around them, to exert some control over the terrifying unknown of what happens after death. You can almost feel the desperate energy that went into crafting these dark charms, the whispered hopes and fears imbued into every scratch and bind. So, while the Pacific Islands didn't typically give you the shambling, physical, reanimated corpses of modern zombie lore, they offered something perhaps more pervasive and deeply spiritual, powerful ancestral presences, imbued with mana, who could actively intervene in the living world. Their influence was constant, their displeasure devastating, and their peaceful rest essential for the well-being of the community. You're left with the quiet lull of the waves, and the unsettling thought that even in these tranquil paradises, the line between the living and the dead was always fluid, always powerful, and always demanding respect. The academic debate concerning classical beliefs in the undead often centers on the degree to which literary and philosophical accounts, which tend to be more symbolic or rationalized, accurately reflect the popular, folk beliefs and superstitions of the common people concerning actual reanimated corpses or actively malevolent spirits. Were Plato and Virgil's descriptions of the underworld truly representative of what the average Roman farmer believed about a ghost? Or were they highly stylized interpretations? It's the challenge of distinguishing between high culture and everyday fear. You leave the sun-drenched shores and powerful ancestral spirits of the Pacific Islands, feeling the warm ocean air gradually replaced by a cooler, damper embrace. The scent of salt and tropical blooms gives way to the earthy aroma of damp soil, ancient rock, and something subtly, unsettlingly primordial. You find yourself standing at the mouth of a cave, perhaps in the rugged limestone landscapes of southern France or northern Spain. A doorway not just into the earth, but into the deep, echoing past of prehistoric Europe. Here, among our early ancestors and their Neanderthal cousins, the very first whispers of what might be considered the undead begin to emerge, less as defined monsters and more as unsettling possibilities gleaned from fragmented bones and ancient rituals. You see how the classical world, with its grand temples and philosophical treatises, was still deeply intertwined with primal fears. The undead weren't just literary devices, they were a very real threat to the peace of the living, demanding rituals, offerings, and sometimes even more drastic measures to keep them at bay. The very foundations of what you call Western thought were built on a bedrock of belief in the possibility of the unquiet dead. The common historical fact that sets the stage here is that early human and Neanderthal burial practices, while often simple, indicate a complex relationship with death, sometimes involving careful interment, grave goods, and even symbolic arrangements that suggest a belief in an afterlife or the continued presence of the deceased. You feel the cool, constant draft from the cave mouth, a breath from millennia past. These weren't just places to discard bodies, they were sites of intentional, meaningful interaction with the dead, hinting at fears or hopes regarding what happened after the last breath. It's like finding a meticulously arranged living room in a long-abandoned house. You know someone cared about who lived there, even if they're gone. The Spanish chroniclers encountering these practices often saw them through a European lens of Christian dualism, struggling to comprehend a belief system where the dead were so intimately woven into daily life. They documented instances of the Spanish attempting to extirpate idolatry by destroying Malqui, often leading to widespread distress and a sense of cosmic imbalance among the indigenous populations. From the Andean perspective, destroying a Malqui wasn't just desecration, it was actively creating an unquiet dead, a furious spirit now unmoored and seeking vengeance. You step into the cave, the light quickly fading behind you, forcing your eyes to adjust to the deepening gloom. The air grows heavy, carrying the faint scent of minerals and stagnant air. Your footsteps echo, making the silence feel even more profound. Imagine a small group of Cro-Magnons or Neanderthals, huddled around a flickering fire, their shadows dancing on the uneven rock walls. Death was a constant companion in this harsh world, but it was rarely a final, simple end. The survival of the group, and perhaps even the individual, depended on maintaining balance, not just with the living world, but with the unseen forces, which might include the spirits of those who had passed. You might feel a shiver, a faint coolness on your skin, a reminder that even in these seemingly distant eras, the fear of death and what might linger beyond it was a universal human experience. Whether a Mesopotamian Ekamu, an Egyptian restless spirit, or a Greek Vrikolakas, the core anxiety remains: what if death isn't the end? And what if those who've passed don't pass quietly? It's a chilling thought to end your first chapter on. Isn't it a lingering unease that settles deep within your bones, urging you to pull the covers up just a little bit higher? For these early peoples, the boundaries between life and death were far more permeable than in our modern, scientifically defined world. The natural world was animated by spirits, and animals, plants, and even rocks possessed a vital essence. It's not a huge leap to imagine that the human spirit, especially one that had once inhabited a powerful hunter or a wise elder, might not simply vanish upon death. The fear wasn't of a physically reanimated corpse in the zombie movie sense, but of a lingering spiritual essence that could influence the living. Perhaps trapped, perhaps vengeful, perhaps just unable to move on. It's like the ultimate squatters. They might not pay rent, but they definitely make their presence known. You shiver, shaking off the lingering cold of ancient Mediterranean fears, and find yourself transported back in time, even further than before. The air is sharper here, tinged with the scent of pine smoke and damp earth. You're no longer amongst the grand tombs and elaborate rituals of settled civilizations, but deep in the primeval forests and rugged landscapes of the Stone Age. Here, humanity is grappling with existence on a raw, elemental level, and their beliefs about death and what might come after are forged in the crucible of survival. This is where the very first inklings of the undead, in their most primal forms, might have taken root in the human imagination. An obscure detail from some prehistoric European sites that hints at unsettling possibilities is the occasional discovery of disarticulated human bones, sometimes bearing cut marks consistent with defleshing or marrow extraction, but not always followed by immediate consumption, suggesting complex funerary or ritual practices that involved processing the dead in ways that could, to the living, evoke a lingering presence or incomplete dissolution. You run your hand over a smooth, cold rock, imagining the rough tools that might have scraped against bone here. These weren't necessarily signs of cannibalism, though. That's a whole other fascinating and awful story we've already explored, but rather a deliberate manipulation of the deceased's remains that goes beyond simple burial. It's like finding a carefully deconstructed Lego set. You know it was once a complete structure. But why is it in pieces, and what was the builder's intention? The common historical fact that illuminates this era is that early human societies, even before the advent of agriculture, engaged in complex burial practices, suggesting a fundamental belief in some form of an afterlife or continued existence beyond physical death. This wasn't just about disposing of a body, it was about honoring the deceased, perhaps guiding their spirit, and, crucially, ensuring they didn't linger where they shouldn't. You might feel the rough bark of an ancient tree beneath your hand, a tangible connection to a time when every rustle in the undergrowth could mean danger, or something far stranger. The academic debate that continues to spark fierce discussions among archaeologists and anthropologists studying prehistoric European sites is whether evidence of post-mortem manipulation of human remains, such as defleshing or bone breakage, invariably points to ritualistic consumption, or if it primarily indicates complex, perhaps even hygienic. Mortuary practices designed to prepare the body or its remains for specific spiritual transitions, potentially creating a form of unquiet dead, if not performed correctly. Was it about eating the deceased, or was it about making sure they stayed dead, or at least moved on peacefully? It's like arguing over whether someone is cleaning out the fridge to make soup or just because it's gross. The physical evidence often offers more questions than answers. Imagine standing at the mouth of a cave, looking out over a valley filled with mammoths and woolly rhinos. Your tribe has gathered, their faces painted with ochre, their expressions solemn. A member of your small community has passed, and their body is carefully placed in a shallow grave, sometimes adorned with flowers or simple tools. These early burials, dating back tens of thousands of years, are powerful evidence that our ancestors were already pondering the mysteries of death. They weren't just discarding corpses, they were performing rites, acknowledging a transition. Consider the harsh realities of Ice Age Europe. Life was brutal and short. Resources were scarce. Death was frequent. In such a world, every life and every death held immense significance. The body of a deceased individual would have been a potent reminder of loss, but also perhaps a resource, both physically and spiritually. The idea that a powerful spirit might remain tied to its physical remains, or to the place of its death, would be a very real concern. You feel the constant cold of the cave, a reminder of the unforgiving environment that shaped these ancient beliefs. But what if that transition wasn't smooth? What if the spirit, or some essence of the deceased, clung to the living world? In the absence of sophisticated theological systems, these early fears would have been rooted in immediate experience, unexplained illnesses, bad harvests, strange noises in the night, or the unsettling sight of a decomposing body. A simple yet profound logical leap might have been made if something bad happened after someone died. Perhaps that someone was responsible. Some theories suggest that certain individuals who died under unusual circumstances, or who were excluded from proper burial, might have been seen as particularly dangerous. A lone hunter lost in a blizzard, a shaman who met a sudden, violent end, or someone who died in a remote, forgotten corner of the wilderness. Their spirits might not find peace, lingering and potentially causing harm to the living. These weren't zombies, but they were certainly undead in the sense that their spiritual presence was unfinished, uncontained, and potentially malevolent. It's like a bad Wi-Fi signal. You know it's there, but it's not working properly and it's causing all sorts of headaches. Consider the basic human experience of grief and loss. When someone dies, especially someone close. Their presence lingers in memory, in dreams, in the very fabric of the community. It's a psychological phenomenon that transcends culture and time. For early humans, without modern scientific explanations for disease or natural disasters, these lingering feelings could easily manifest as a belief that the deceased spirit was still present, perhaps even acting upon the world. It's like when you feel the phantom vibration of your phone in your pocket. Your mind expects a signal, even if it's not there. The very landscape of these prehistoric times, dominated by vast, untamed forests and deep, mysterious caves, would have fostered a sense of awe and fear of the unknown. Caves, in particular, were often seen as portals to the underworld, places where the veil between worlds was thin. It's easy to imagine stories emerging of figures who disappeared into such places, only to return changed, or whose spirits haunted these liminal spaces. The darkness of the cave presses in around you, making you acutely aware of your own vulnerability. The earliest forms of the undead in the Stone Age wouldn't have been the fast-moving, flesh-eating monsters of your nightmares. Instead, they were likely more subtle, more ethereal, perhaps even more terrifying in their ambiguity. They were the inexplicable, the unsettling, the things that went bump in the pre-dawn darkness. You can almost feel the cold dread of an ancient ancestor, huddling by a fire, listening to the night sounds and imagining the unseen things that might walk in the wilderness. The concept of a revenant, a person believed to have returned from the dead to haunt the living, is deeply embedded in later European folklore. But its roots could arguably stretch back to these early fears. While the medieval revenant was often a physically reanimated corpse, the underlying fear of a restless, malevolent dead person who wouldn't stay buried might have originated from these earlier anxieties about proper burial and the fate of the soul. You hear a drip of water in the distance, each drop sounding like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. An obscure detail from the Stone Age that hints at practices related to the undead is the discovery of defensive or deviant burials, where bodies were treated in unusual ways that suggest an attempt to prevent the deceased from returning. These findings are sporadic and open to interpretation, but they include practices like removing the head, placing heavy stones on the corpse, or even burying the body face down. Imagine the sheer terror that would drive a small, struggling community to take such drastic measures against one of their own who had passed. It wasn't about disrespect. It was about desperate protection. Think about the sheer practicalities of dealing with death in a nomadic or semi-nomadic society. Bodies couldn't always be transported far. The decomposition process was a visible, unavoidable reality. How did these early humans interpret the changes in a body after death? Did they believe the lingering spirit caused the changes? Or was it a sign of an unclean spirit? The careful positioning of bodies in some graves, sometimes with stones placed over limbs or even the head, could be interpreted not just as ritual, but as a form of keeping the dead down, ensuring they wouldn't, in some form, return. It's like putting a heavy blanket on a child to make sure they actually stay in bed. These deviant burials are particularly fascinating because they imply a very early understanding of a physical connection between the body and the ability of the deceased to interact with the living world. If you cut off the head, or weigh down the body, you are trying to physically inhibit movement. This is a far cry from the purely spiritual ekimu, or restless Egyptian souls. It hints at a belief in a more tangible, reanimated corpse, even if that reanimation was still rooted in spiritual concepts rather than biological processes. It's like finding a dead battery and thinking, well, if I just sit on it, it definitely won't come back to life. The artwork found in these caves, vibrant depictions of animals and hunters, speak to a rich spiritual life. Shamans likely played a crucial role, mediating between the living and the spirit world, guiding souls to the afterlife, and protecting the community from dangerous entities. The presence of these powerful intermediaries suggests that the need for spiritual protection from the unquiet dead was a real and present concern. You trace the faint lines of an ancient bison on the cave wall, feeling the primal power it still holds. The academic debate surrounding these early burial anomalies often grapples with whether these deviant burials are direct evidence of beliefs in physical reanimation, proto-zombies, or merely reflect other cultural practices, such as symbolic punishment, fear of contamination, or unique tribal customs that have no direct link to the undead. It's a classic archaeological challenge. How do you interpret behavior from so long ago, with so little direct evidence? And how much of our own modern biases are we projecting onto these ancient remains? It's like trying to understand a complex inside joke from 100,000 years ago, without any context. The discovery of intentionally buried dog remains alongside humans in some upper Paleolithic sites might also hint at a belief in companion spirits, or perhaps even guardians against malevolent forces. The idea of animal spirits accompanying the dead, or even acting as sentinels against unwanted spiritual returns, adds another layer to these complex beliefs. It's like having a trusty guard dog for your eternal sleep. For instance, a body buried face down could be a sign of disrespect, a ritualistic act for a criminal, or it could be a deliberate attempt to disorient the spirit, preventing it from finding its way back. A heavy stone on the chest might simply prevent scavengers, or it might be an intentional way to pin a restless dead. These distinctions are incredibly difficult to make, but the very existence of such unusual burials suggests a deep-seated anxiety about the deceased and their potential to influence the living. So, while prehistoric Europe might not offer tales of shambling hordes, it provides the foundational anxieties that later blossomed into full-blown undead folklore. The fear of the unquiet dead, the lingering spirit, the body not properly put to rest. The potential for malevolent influence from beyond the grave, these are the subtle, unsettling echoes that resonate from these ancient cave dwellings. You emerge from the cave mouth, blinking in the returning light, but carrying with you the chill of a time when the dead were never truly gone, only transformed, and sometimes restless. Think about how a hunter-gatherer society would experience death. It would be a constant presence, a harsh reality. Every death was a loss, but also potentially a new spiritual variable in the complex ecosystem of their beliefs. If someone died of an unknown illness, perhaps their spirit carried that affliction. If someone died violently, perhaps their rage would linger. These were not abstract ideas, they were visceral. Immediate fears rooted in the daily struggle for survival. You can almost feel the primal urge to understand and control the forces beyond your comprehension. You leave the echoing silence of ancient European caves, the damp chill still clinging to your clothes, and the subtle dread of unquiet spirits from the distant past. Now, you're transported to a different kind of closeness with the departed, one that challenges modern sensibilities but reveals a profound human desire for connection, even beyond the grave. We are moving into a space where the dead are not just revered or feared from a distance, but are intimately, physically, and spiritually incorporated back into the living community. This is the realm of endo-cannibalism, a practice so rooted in kinship that it offers a unique perspective on what it meant for ancient cultures to believe in and manage the state of being undead. The fear of contagion, even if not understood scientifically, might have also played a role. A decaying body is a source of disease. If someone died of a highly contagious illness, burying them differently, or taking measures to ensure they didn't return even if just as a vector for disease, makes a pragmatic kind of sense. But for an ancient mind, the disease itself might have been attributed to the restless spirit of the deceased. It's a very early, very terrifying form of germ theory. The common historical fact that illuminates this chapter is that endo-cannibalism, the ritualistic consumption of human remains by members of the deceased's own social group, was practiced by diverse cultures across the globe, often as a spiritual act intended to maintain the bond with the departed, absorb their virtues, or ensure their peaceful passage and continued presence within the lineage, sharply distinguishing it from the more aggressive ecto-cannibalism of enemies. You feel a different kind of closeness now, almost a visceral sense of shared existence. This wasn't about starvation or savage acts. It was a deeply symbolic and often tender expression of grief, remembrance, and a sophisticated understanding of the soul's journey. It's like wanting to keep a loved one so close that you can almost feel them in your bones. But then, some cultures just took that metaphor a little more literally. As human societies began to organize into larger groups, and as early forms of communal living emerged, the need for social cohesion became paramount. The restless dead could represent a threat to this cohesion, a disruptive force that needed to be contained. Early rituals and taboos around death would have served to reinforce social order, ensuring that the deceased transitioned peacefully and didn't cause chaos among the living. It's like setting boundaries for a misbehaving child, but the child is dead and potentially terrifying. Imagine yourself in a rainforest village in the Amazon, perhaps among the Yanomami people, or in the remote highlands of Papua New Guinea with the Four people, before their tragic encounters with modern diseases. The air is thick with the scent of tropical vegetation, damp earth, and the faint, sweet smell of wood smoke. Life here is communal, interconnected, and death is not an isolated event but a transition that affects the entire group. When someone passes, the grief is profound, but it's often tempered by an immediate focus on ensuring their spirit's journey is complete and that their essence remains a part of the living. The very landscape of the Stone Age would have contributed to these beliefs. Dark. Echoing caves could easily be perceived as entrances to the underworld, places where spirits lingered. Dense, ancient forests, with their strange sounds and impenetrable shadows, would be fertile ground for imagining unseen entities. The sheer vulnerability of early humans in the face of nature's immense power would have led them to seek explanations and control through spiritual means. You can feel the cold, damp air of a primal forest, the rustle of unseen things in the darkness, the faint primal fear that sends a shiver down your spine. For many of these cultures, the fear of the undead wasn't necessarily of a shambling corpse, but of a disembodied, wandering spirit that had no place to rest. A soul condemned to eternal restlessness, and potentially causing harm to the living by its very presence. Endocannibalism, in many cases, was seen as a way to prevent this tragic fate. By consuming a part of the deceased, the living literally ingested the essence of their loved one, ensuring their soul found its final resting place within the bodies of their kin, preventing it from becoming a malevolent wanderer. It's the ultimate form of spiritual recycling, ensuring no good soul goes to waste, or, more importantly, goes rogue. The practice of ancestor veneration, common in many early cultures, also exists on a spectrum that touches upon the undead. While most ancestors were revered and sought for guidance, there was always the underlying fear that a displeased ancestor could turn malevolent. It's like having a strict grandparent who you respect, but you also definitely don't want to get on their bad side. These were powerful spirits who could bring blessings or curses, depending on how they were treated. An obscure detail about how some of these endocannibalistic rituals were performed is the practice of consuming the cremated bone ash of the deceased, often mixed into a banana soup or other foodstuff, rather than flesh or organs directly. You might imagine the crackle of a funeral pyre, the slow, reverent process of gathering the bone fragments after the fire has cooled, and then the careful grinding of these into a fine powder. This wasn't a feast, it was a sacred meal, imbued with immense spiritual significance. The ash was believed to carry the essence of the person, their memories, their wisdom, and their very being. By consuming it, you were not just remembering them, you were literally incorporating them into your own being, strengthening the lineage and ensuring the deceased's continuity. It's a very different kind of family heirloom, one you don't display on the mantelpiece but carry within you. So, while the explicit term zombie or vampire wouldn't emerge for millennia, the foundational fears and observations were clearly present in the Stone Age. The fear of an unquiet death, the desire to prevent the deceased from harming the living, and the rudimentary attempts to control the fate of the dead. These were the fertile grounds from which more elaborate undead myths would later blossom. You're witnessing the very embryonic stages of these fears, taking root in the deep, dark soil of human prehistory. It's a quiet, unsettling origin story. Isn't it one that echoes down the millennia, shaping the very monsters you fear today? The academic debate that continues to swirl around the interpretation of endocannibalism is whether these practices were solely driven by spiritual beliefs regarding soul transference and ancestral connection, or if they were also influenced by pragmatic considerations such as extreme expressions of grief, a symbolic way to maintain group cohesion, or even, in some extreme cases, a response to resource scarcity? Was it purely about the soul, or was there a subtle, unspoken layer of societal function? It's like trying to untangle whether you bought that expensive car for its performance, or because your neighbor just got one. Human motivations are rarely singular, especially when dealing with something as profound as death. You leave the generalized shadows of the broader Stone Age, stepping now into a specific, colder, an often misunderstood chapter of human prehistory. The air here carries a faint, earthy scent, perhaps of ancient fires in the damp confines of a cave. You're in the world of the Neanderthals, our ancient cousins who roamed the landscapes of Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They'd lived harsh lives, marked by the constant struggle against formidable megafauna, the unforgiving chill of ice ages, and the relentless quest for sustenance. Their world was one of immediate survival. Yet, paradoxically, their archaeological record reveals a nuanced engagement with death, raising fascinating bone puzzles that speak to their own beliefs about what happened when life ceased. Consider the intense social fabric of these communities. In small, tightly knit groups, the loss of an individual isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a hole in the collective. Endo-cannibalism, in this context, wasn't just a private act of mourning, it was a public declaration of unity, a reaffirmation that despite death, the group remained whole, literally absorbing its lost member. The ritual would have been intensely emotional, a collective experience of grief, remembrance, and spiritual renewal. You feel the deep hum of shared experience, the raw emotion of loss, and the strength of communal bonds. The common historical fact that sets the stage here is that Neanderthals, far from being the brutish, unthinking cave dwellers sometimes depicted in older textbooks, exhibited behaviors indicative of complex cognitive abilities, including the deliberate burial of their dead. This isn't a widely known fact to everyone, but it's a foundational piece of evidence in modern anthropology. You're walking into one of their rock shelters, perhaps a place like La Chapelle aux Saints or Shanadar Cave. The light filters in, casting long shadows on the uneven floor, illuminating the very spot where bones, carefully placed, were once found. Imagine the scene: a small band of Neanderthals, their broad shoulders hunched, their faces etched with the lines of a tough life. One of their own, perhaps a respected elder or a skilled hunter, has fallen. The group gathers, and instead of leaving the body to the elements or scavengers, they meticulously prepare a shallow grave. They might position the body in a fetal crouch, sometimes placing tools, animal bones, or even remnants of flowers around it. This act, repeated across various sites, isn't just about practical disposal, it speaks of respect, remembrance, and a recognition of the deceased's continued significance. It's like their version of a somber farewell, complete with a carefully chosen outfit for the afterlife. But what happens when that carefully laid rest isn't enough? What if the fear of the unquiet dead lingered? Even for Neanderthals, their lives were brutal and uncertain. Sudden deaths from hunting accidents, illnesses, or encounters with predators would have been common. Such abrupt departures might have fueled anxieties about spirits clinging to the living world, especially if the death was traumatic or unexplained. You can almost hear the soft, rhythmic drips of water from the cave ceiling, echoing a primal silence broken only by the crackle of a distant fire. The ritual itself would be guided by elders or shamans, ensuring that every step was performed correctly to avoid angering the spirit or trapping it improperly. The precise preparation of the remains, the specific words spoken, the order of consumption, all would be meticulously followed. A mistake could mean the very spiritual outcome they were trying to achieve. The peaceful integration of the soul could be jeopardized, potentially leaving the spirit restless and malevolent. It's like following a very precise recipe, where the main ingredient is ancestral essence. And getting it wrong means you don't just ruin dinner, you unleash a ghost. The bone puzzles emerge from certain Neanderthal sites where the treatment of remains goes beyond simple burial. These findings present archaeologists with tantalizing, yet frustratingly ambiguous, clues about a deeper apprehension. Were some bodies treated in ways that suggest a fear of their return? These anomalies are what make the Neanderthal story so much more complex than just a simple burial narrative. The distinction between the good dead, those properly consumed or transitioned, and the bad dead, those who became unquiet or malevolent, was crucial. Endo-cannibalism was a proactive measure against the latter, a way to ensure that the ancestors remained benevolent forces, watching over their descendants rather than becoming spirits of misfortune. The fear of an unintegrated spirit, a soul left to wander aimlessly between worlds, drove these profound and intimate rituals. You feel a distinct chill, a reminder that even in acts of love there can be an underlying fear. An obscure detail that highlights these bone puzzles is the evidence of perimortem defleshing marks on some Neanderthal bones, suggesting that bodies were stripped of flesh close to the time of death, sometimes preceding burial, but in ways that are distinct from typical butchery for consumption. While this often sparks debates about Neanderthal cannibalism, a separate, though related topic, some scholars propose that such defleshing could also be a ritualistic act aimed at purifying the body, separating the spirit, or even ensuring that the deceased could not return. It's like a very, very thorough cleaning service before you send someone off to the great beyond. Think about the psychological impact on the participants. The act of consuming a part of a loved one would create an undeniable, indelible memory, a constant reminder of their presence. It would deepen the bonds within the community and with their ancestors, fostering a unique sense of identity tied directly to their lineage. It's an intimacy with death that modern societies rarely experience, blurring the lines between life and legacy in a way that's both unsettling and profoundly moving. Imagine the scene where this might have occurred, perhaps a shaman or a respected elder overseeing the process, using flint tools to carefully remove the soft tissues from the bones. This wasn't necessarily a horrific act in their context, but a solemn, perhaps necessary, part of guiding the dead. If the physical body was believed to be a tether for the spirit, then modifying or processing the body could have been a powerful way to sever that connection, to ensure the spirit moved on to its proper realm, or simply to prevent the corpse from being reanimated. It's like making sure you unplug all the appliances before you go on vacation, just in case they decide to turn themselves on and invite all their zombie friends over. These practices also served as powerful social markers, reinforcing clan identity and distinguishing the group from outsiders. The shared act of communal consumption was a testament to their interconnectedness, a ritual that transcended individual grief and forged a collective spiritual body. It's a reminder that human rituals around death are incredibly diverse, often born from deep philosophical understandings of what it means to be alive, to die, and to continue existing in some form. The academic debate that persistently surrounds these specific Neanderthal findings often centers on whether the evidence of defleshing and particular bone assemblages unequivocally demonstrates ritualistic treatment aimed at preventing the return of the dead, or if these practices are more accurately interpreted as a form of mortuary cannibalism, secondary burial processing, or even post-mortem scavenger activity mistaken for human intervention. The bones themselves can't speak, unfortunately, which leaves a lot of room for scholarly disagreement. It's a bit like finding a half-eaten sandwich and arguing whether it was a quick snack, part of a complex culinary ritual, or just a very hungry squirrel. The decline of endo-cannibalistic practices often coincided with the arrival of missionaries and colonial powers, who viewed such rituals as barbaric and uncivilized, leading to their suppression. This external pressure often broke ancient spiritual cycles, inadvertently contributing to the loss of unique understandings of life, death, and the soul. What was seen as progress from one perspective might have been the shattering of a delicate spiritual balance from another. For example, the site of Krapina in Croatia yielded many Neanderthal bones with cut marks and signs of breakage that some interpret as evidence of cannibalism. However, other researchers argue these marks could indicate ritual defleshing, or even the purposeful shaping of bones for tools. If it was about preventing reanimation, the logic would be, if there's no intact body, there's nothing for the spirit to come back to. This would be a very pragmatic approach to undead containment. Wouldn't it a kind of ultimate deterrent? So, while the idea of endo-cannibalism might make you squirm, understand that for many ancient cultures, it was an ultimate act of love, grief, and spiritual responsibility. It was a powerful strategy to ensure their loved ones, even in death, remained integrated within the living community, preventing their spirits from ever becoming truly undead in the restless, unmoored sense. You're left with the quiet echo of ancient drums and chants, a reminder of the many profound ways humanity has grappled with the finality of death and the enduring hope for connection. Think about the psychological impact of seeing a familiar body, now lifeless, and the innate human desire to understand and control death. For Neanderthals living in close-knit groups, the death of a member would have been deeply impactful, not just emotionally, but also practically, reducing the number of hunters or gatherers. The fear of that loss being compounded by a returned malevolent entity would have been a powerful motivator for preventative measures. You can almost feel the chill of existential dread seeping into the warmth of the communal fire. You've journeyed through the unsettling intimacy of endo-cannibalism, the practice of literally incorporating the dead back into the living. Now, let's ease away from the more visceral, stomach-churning aspects of interaction with the departed, and slide into something far more pervasive, far more subtle, yet equally profound, the vast and varied world of symbolic consumption. Here, the undead aren't consumed for their physical essence, but rather their memory, their power, or their influence, through rituals and beliefs that shape entire cultures. This is where the fear of the restless dead truly comes into its own, not as a threat of physical reanimation, but as a lurking spiritual influence that must be constantly acknowledged, appeased, or contained. Consider also the spiritual landscape of the Neanderthals. While they didn't leave behind written texts, their archaeological footprint suggests a symbolic world. Ochre, a pigment used for body decoration and cave art, is often found in burial contexts. This implies a belief system where colors, symbols, and rituals held meaning. Within such a framework, manipulating the body of the deceased could have been a powerful ritual act, designed to ensure peace for both the dead and the living. The common historical fact that illuminates this realm is that virtually all ancient cultures, regardless of geographical location or societal complexity, developed intricate rituals, ceremonies, and material practices designed to honor, remember, or appease the dead, often involving offerings, effigies, or ceremonial acts that represented a form of spiritual feeding or interaction, ensuring the deceased's peaceful transition and preventing their unwanted return or lingering presence. You feel a sense of universal human experience, a shared thread woven through every civilization, from the simplest hunter-gatherer camps to the grandest empires. It's like finding out that even if people speak different languages, everyone understands the universal groan of waking up early. The environment itself would have fostered these beliefs. Caves, with their dark depths and echoing chambers, could easily be perceived as thresholds to another world. The cycle of seasons, the life and death of animals, the mysteries of fertility and decay, all these would have contributed to a worldview where the boundaries between the living and the dead were permeable, and easily transgressed if not properly managed. You can feel the cold stone of the cave wall against your back, the ancient silence pressing in. Imagine yourself in ancient Rome, perhaps during the Parentalia, a 9-day festival dedicated to honoring ancestors. You walk past homes adorned with wreaths and see families gathered, offering wine, bread, and flowers at ancestral tombs. This wasn't about eating great-great-grandma, but about feeding her spirit, symbolically providing for her needs in the afterlife. The fear wasn't that she'd shamble out of her grave demanding a snack, but that if neglected, her spirit, a lemur's or a larva, might become mischievous or even malevolent, causing nightmares or ill fortune for the living. It's like forgetting to charge your spiritual AirPods. Eventually, they just start making static noise in your head. Perhaps the fear of the undead also stemmed from a rudimentary understanding of disease transmission. If a tribe member died from an unknown illness, and then others fell ill, an ancient mind might have connected the sickness to the deceased. Measures to prevent the return of the dead could have inadvertently served as early forms of quarantine or disease management, reinforcing the belief that the dead could be dangerous. It's like their version of 6 feet under being not just about burial, but about social distancing from potential ghostly contagions. For many ancient peoples, the distinction between a living being and its spiritual essence was fluid. When someone died, their spirit didn't necessarily vanish. It could linger, attached to its former home, its belongings, or even its loved ones. The fear of the undead was often rooted in this lingering presence, a spirit unable to find peace, trapped between worlds, or worse, deliberately choosing to cause harm out of neglect or anger. Symbolic consumption, then, was a vital tool in managing this spiritual uncertainty, ensuring the dead remained well-fed and content in their new state of being. So, while you might not find a Neanderthal with a "beware of zombies" sign outside their cave, the bone puzzles and the complex nature of their burial practices strongly suggest that they, too, grappled with the terrifying possibility of an unquiet dead. Their solutions might have been stark: rooted in the physical world of bone and earth. But the underlying fear that death might not be the final curtain, and that those who depart might not truly leave, resonates across the millennia, connecting their world to your own deepest anxieties. It's a quiet, cold realization. Isn't it? That even in the deepest past, the monsters you fear today were already lurking in the human mind? An obscure detail found in various unrelated cultures is the practice of ritually breaking or killing objects, particularly weapons or tools, found in graves, or placing offerings in vessels that are then deliberately shattered. You might hear the crisp sound of pottery breaking, or feel the dull thud of a spear snapping. This wasn't just about preventing grave robbery, it was a profound symbolic act. The idea was to kill the object so its spirit could accompany the deceased into the afterlife, providing them with necessities in the spirit world. But it also had a secondary unspoken function to prevent the lingering spirit of the dead from using those objects to return to the living world or to exert influence. If you broke their favorite sword, how could they possibly wield it to come back and bother you? It's like confiscating your teenager's phone after bedtime, and without it, their influence on the outside world is severely limited. You pull yourself from the cold, echoing depths of Neanderthal caves, a faint chill still clinging to your psyche, and are swept across oceans and millennia to a land vibrant with color, ritual, and a cosmology woven with blood and sacred purpose. The air here is warm, humid, carrying the scent of copal incense, blooming flowers, and something else. Something coppery and ancient, a testament to profound sacrifice. You're in Mesoamerica, a world ruled by powerful city-states, towering pyramids, and an intricate understanding of the cosmos, where the line between life, death, and the divine was not just thin, but constantly interwoven through elaborate rituals. The academic debate that persistently challenges scholars is whether the widespread practice of leaving elaborate grave goods and offerings, or performing rituals that simulate sustenance, genuinely reflects a belief in the dead's literal need for these items in an afterlife, or if it serves primarily as a symbolic mechanism for the living to process grief, maintain social order, or reinforce ancestral lineage. Are they truly sending a care package to the beyond? Or is it more like a very elaborate, public way of saying, "We miss you, and look how much we cared"? It's the classic chicken or egg question, but with ancient funerary rites and spiritual snacks. The common historical fact that dominates any understanding of these civilizations, particularly the Aztecs and Maya, is that human sacrifice was a central and essential component of their religious practices. Believed to be vital for maintaining cosmic order, appeasing powerful deities, and ensuring the sun would continue its journey across the sky. You might see vibrant murals depicting gods, warriors, and captives, their eyes wide with stories. It wasn't about random brutality. It was a deeply ingrained, almost bureaucratic system of cosmic reciprocity. Imagine having to pay your taxes and human lives just to keep the lights on. Talk about high stakes. Consider the role of feasts of the dead. From ancient China's ghost festival where food is offered to wandering spirits, to the Mexican Dia de Muertos with its elaborate ofrendas, altars with food and drink, cultures worldwide have symbolically fed their dead. You smell the rich aroma of traditional dishes, hear the soft murmurs of families gathered, perhaps a distant, melancholic tune. These feasts were not just memorials, they were active engagements. By preparing favorite foods and placing them as offerings, the living invited their ancestors to partake, symbolically bridging the gap between worlds. If the spirits were satiated and remembered, they were benevolent. If forgotten, they might become hungry ghosts, a potent form of the undead, driven by insatiable longing and capable of causing misfortune. It's a very high-stakes potluck, where forgetting the spiritual appetizers could lead to supernatural mischief. You stand now in the bustling heart of Tenochtitlan, the magnificent capital of the Aztec Empire, a city built on an island in the middle of a vast lake. The Great Temple, or Templo Mayor, looms before you, its twin shrines dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and sun, and Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. The sounds are a cacophony of life market vendors calling out, priests chanting, the rhythmic beat of drums. Yet beneath this vibrant surface, there is the ever-present knowledge of the sacred obligation to offer life back to the gods. Think about the psychological comfort this provided. In a world with high mortality rates and little scientific understanding of disease, these rituals offered a sense of control over the uncontrollable. By performing the correct rites, by symbolically consuming the burden of grief, and by feeding the ancestors, individuals and communities could believe they were safeguarding themselves from the malevolent or simply unsettling aspects of the dead. It's like having a spiritual insurance policy against spectral nuisances. For the Aztecs, death was not an end, but a transformation, a necessary part of the cycle of existence. The universe itself was believed to be in a constant struggle, needing fresh blood to sustain its energy. Those chosen for sacrifice were often seen as messengers, special individuals who would join the gods or become part of the celestial machinery. But what did that mean for their posthumous existence? And could they, in a sense, return to the world of the living, perhaps as a form of the undead? Another form of symbolic consumption involves the absorption of a deceased person's qualities or power. While endo-cannibalism might have done this literally, many cultures achieved it symbolically. Warriors might wear the teeth or bones of powerful animals they hunted, or the scalps of defeated enemies, believing they were absorbing their strength, courage, or essence. This isn't about hunger, it's about a spiritual transference. In a way, they are consuming the power of the deceased, or what the deceased represented, into themselves. This protective consumption was also a deterrent against the lingering spirits of the defeated. If you wore their scalp, their spirit was subservient. The Aztec afterlife was complex, with different destinations depending on how one died. Warriors who fell in battle, or those sacrificed to Huitzilopochtli, went to the eastern heaven, accompanying the sun on its daily journey. Women who died in childbirth, akin to fallen warriors, went to the western heaven. Those who drowned or died of water-related causes went to Tlalocan, a verdant paradise. Only those who died of natural causes, or less glorious deaths, faced the arduous journey through Mictlan, the underworld, a 9-level realm ruled by Mictlantecutli and Mictacasihuatl, the skeletal lord and lady of the dead. The creation and veneration of effigies or ancestral figures also falls under symbolic consumption. These weren't just statues. They were often believed to be vessels for the spirits of the dead. By offering prayers, sacrifices, and interaction with these figures, the living were symbolically nourishing the spirit residing within, keeping it powerful and benevolent. You might touch the cool, smooth surface of a carved wooden ancestor figure, feeling the weight of generations of veneration. If these effigies were neglected or desecrated, the spirit within could become unmoored, restless, and even vengeful, thus transforming into a form of the undead. It's in Mictlan, and among certain categories of the glorious dead, that notions of the undead begin to take a fascinating Mesoamerican twist. These weren't typically the physical reanimation of corpses as you might imagine in a modern zombie apocalypse. Instead, the Mesoamerican undead were often powerful, spiritual entities, sometimes benevolent, sometimes terrifyingly malevolent, whose very existence transcended the neat boundaries of life and death. The very act of storytelling and oral tradition about ancestors is a form of symbolic consumption. By recounting their deeds, their wisdom, and their lives, the living consume their legacy, keeping their memory alive and integrated into the fabric of the community. In many ancient societies, to be forgotten was a fate worse than death itself, as it condemned the spirit to wander eternally without recognition or purpose. The fear of being forgotten, and thus becoming a truly lost, undead entity, was a powerful motivator for perpetuating oral histories. It's like your family's embarrassing holiday stories. Even if you wish they'd die, they just keep getting reanimated every year. An obscure detail from Aztec belief involves the Cihuateteo, the spirits of women who died during childbirth. These women were revered, considered fierce and powerful, akin to warrior goddesses. However, they were also believed to be dangerous. On certain days of the Tonalpohualli, the Aztec ritual calendar, they would descend to Earth from the western sky, particularly at crossroads, seeking to kidnap children or cause disease. They were depicted with skeletal faces and clawed hands, their hair wild. Imagine a group of spectral, angry supermoms, and you're halfway there. You probably wouldn't want to get on their bad side, which seems pretty easy to do if you're a child just trying to cross the street. Consider the role of charms and amulets made from natural materials or representations of sacred symbols. These were often imbued with protective power, sometimes believed to be derived from benevolent ancestral spirits or powerful deities. By wearing or possessing such an item, you were symbolically consuming its protection, absorbing its safeguarding qualities. This was a proactive defense against malevolent spirits or the unquiet dead, a way to build a spiritual shield around yourself. The Tihuatateo are a perfect example of a nuanced undead concept, not mindless shamblers, but powerful Kawinyas, supernaturally endowed beings whose posthumous state made them both venerated and feared. They weren't quite living, not quite conventionally dead, existing in a liminal space where they could directly influence the mortal world, often with ill intent. Their reanimated power was spiritual, not physical, yet their effects were very real sickness, madness, and even the abduction of the young. It's like they had a superpower, but it was really only useful for haunting and causing trouble. In many shamanistic traditions, the shaman himself acts as a conduit, symbolically consuming or temporarily embodying the spirits of ancestors or powerful animals to gain knowledge, healing abilities, or protection. This isn't possession in the frightening, demonic sense, but a controlled, ritualized merging of essence for the benefit of the community. The shaman's journey to the spirit world, often in a trance state, can be seen as a symbolic journey to consume or retrieve something vital from the realm of the dead. The consumption of specific body parts was also significant in some variations of endocannibalism. While bone ash was common, some traditions focused on the brain, believed to be the seat of wisdom and memory, or the heart, the source of courage and emotion. By consuming these, the living sought to inherit the specific virtues of the deceased. Imagine a son consuming a small portion of his warrior father's heart, believing he would gain his father's bravery. This wasn't about hunger, it was about legacy, a direct physical inheritance of qualities. It's like downloading your ancestors' entire skill tree directly into your own consciousness. The academic debate about the symbolism often touches on how these symbolic acts could reinforce social hierarchies. If only certain individuals or families could perform specific rituals, or possessed particular ancestral effigies, it bolstered their status and power within the community. The dead, through symbolic consumption, thus played a role in maintaining the living social order. It's like arguing whether a royal family's traditions are purely about heritage or if there's a subtle marketing strategy behind all those fancy hats. The academic debate that persistently surrounds Mesoamerican sacred practices, especially concerning those who were sacrificed, often questions the degree to which the Aztec and Mayan belief systems truly envisioned a return or reanimation of the deceased in a literal sense, versus a spiritual transformation where the individual became a powerful, albeit non-physical entity that could interact with the living world. Were the Kiwateteo genuinely seen as physically walking the earth? Or were they more akin to vengeful ghosts or powerful spiritual forces? It's like trying to figure out if your friend meant they were dying of laughter, literally or figuratively. The nuances of ancient spiritual belief are incredibly tricky to pin down. Think about the fear associated with curses or oaths sworn by the dead. If someone violated a promise made over a grave, or broke an oath invoked in the name of ancestors, the retribution wasn't physical, but spiritual. The offended spirits, now unquiet and malevolent, would symbolically consume the prosperity, health, or sanity of the transgressor. This belief served as a powerful moral and legal enforcement mechanism in societies without formal written laws. Beyond the Cihuatateo, the journey through Mictlan was fraught with peril. Souls had to overcome various challenges, jaguar attacks, freezing winds, mountains that crashed together, and fields of obsidian blades. Only by successfully navigating these trials could the soul find rest. But what if a soul failed? What if it became stuck, wandering endlessly between realms, its journey incomplete? Such a lost soul, denied rest and unable to find its place, could very well be seen as another form of the undead, perhaps less actively malevolent than the Tihuateteo, but still a source of unease and potential spiritual disturbance. You can almost feel the weight of their failed journey. their endless yearning for peace. The very landscape itself could be symbolically consumed. Sacred groves, ancient burial grounds, or specific geological formations were often believed to be infused with the spirits of the dead. By respecting these places, by leaving offerings, or by performing rituals there, the living were symbolically consuming the peace and blessings that emanated from them, ensuring the spirits within remained benevolent and not restless. You might feel a profound sense of calm near an ancient, moss-covered stone, a feeling that could be interpreted as the positive presence of lingering spirits. The Mayan civilization to the south shared many cosmological similarities with the Aztecs, though their pantheon and specific rituals differed. For the Maya, the underworld, Xibalba was a terrifying place ruled by the lords of Xibalba. It was a place of trials and trickery, and souls often faced grim fates there. The maize god, central to Mayan cosmology, famously died and was reborn from Xibalba, illustrating the cyclic nature of death and regeneration. The transition from literal physical consumption to symbolic acts reveals a deepening sophistication in how ancient cultures conceptualized the afterlife and the nature of the undead. It's no longer just about the body, it's about the soul, the memory, the influence, and the power that persists beyond the grave. And the ways to manage these lingering presences became equally diverse, ranging from elaborate festivals of remembrance to intimate, personal charms. However, the Maya also held beliefs about restless spirits. Those who died violently or were left unburied could become wayab, or companion spirits, which could manifest as terrifying animalistic forms and cause harm to the living. These weren't necessarily the souls of the dead, but powerful entities associated with them. The common Mayan people, like the Aztecs, relied on rituals, offerings, and reverence for ancestors to ensure peaceful transitions and protect themselves from malevolent forces. You might imagine the humid air of the jungle, thick with the scent of rain and earth, hiding ancient secrets. So, as you drift further into the history of the undead, recognize that the most common belief wasn't in a shambling corpse, but in a spiritual force, a memory, a curse, a blessing that refused to die. And humanity, in its infinite ingenuity, developed countless ways to symbolically consume, contain, or appease these enduring presences, ensuring that the past, in its many forms, remained a part of the living present. Consider the role of specific places in Mesoamerican cosmology, such as cenotes, natural sinkholes in the Mayan lowlands. These were often seen as portals to the underworld. While primarily places of sacred offerings, the idea of a direct link to the realm of the dead could foster fears of spirits, or even their physical manifestations, emerging from these watery depths. It's like your local swimming hole having a direct connection to hell. That's a strong deterrent for swimming, right? You've traversed the unsettling landscape of symbolic consumption. Understanding how ancient peoples fed their dead with rituals, offerings, and shared memory, all to ensure the departed found peace and didn't become restless. Now, as our journey through the history of the undead draws to a close, you stand at the precipice of time, looking back across millennia to see how those deep-seated primordial fears of the unquiet dead have not faded into dusty obscurity, but rather transformed, evolving into the chilling specters and shambling horrors that populate our modern nightmares and screen time. The echoes of ancient beliefs are not just faint whispers, they are the very DNA of our contemporary undead myths. The architecture itself in Mesoamerica seems to embody this dynamic relationship with death. Pyramids were not just temples, but mountains of creation, often containing tombs beneath them, connecting the terrestrial world to the celestial and underworld realms. The very layout of their cities was a cosmological map, constantly reminding the inhabitants of the thin veil between life and death. You feel the rough, carved stone beneath your fingers, bearing witness to centuries of ritual. The common historical fact that ties all these threads together is that the human fascination with and fear of the deceased returning or lingering beyond the grave is a universal and enduring cultural phenomenon, reflecting a fundamental anxiety about mortality, the unknown, and the boundaries between life and death. You feel this pervasive tremor, an almost instinctual unease that persists whether you're huddled by a prehistoric campfire or scrolling through horror movie trailers. It's the ultimate return to sender problem. Except the package is a former human being and the sender is, well, death itself. And no, you can't just mark it refused. For instance, the Aztec practice of taking the skulls of sacrificial victims and displaying them on racks called sumpantli was a profound act. While gruesome to modern sensibilities, these weren't meant to be terrifying displays of the undead. Instead, they were powerful statements of cosmic energy and the perpetuation of the life cycle through sacrifice. The skulls were seen as seeds of rebirth, contributing to the fertility of the earth and the continuation of the cosmos. However, the sheer presence of so many human remains, if viewed through a different lens, could certainly evoke a sense of the lingering dead. It's like a very, very macabre art installation, but it's actually about farming. Imagine the ancient Roman offering food to their lemurs, fearful of a mischievous and malevolent spirit haunting their home. Fast forward to today, and you have ghost hunting shows, haunted houses, and poltergeist movies. The transition is remarkably direct. The Roman larva, a restless, often unhappy spirit of someone who died prematurely or violently, finds its direct descendant in the modern ghost that knocks over lamps, slams doors, or whispers chilling messages from the other side. The core fear remains a deceased individual whose consciousness, for whatever reason, cannot or will not leave our plane of existence. It's like a perpetually overstaying houseguest who also happens to be invisible and can make your silverware rattle. The constant cycle of ritual and sacrifice was a way to manage the flow of life and death, to prevent cosmic imbalance that could lead to catastrophe. In a world where the sun could cease to rise if not properly fed, or where famine and disease could strike without warning. The stakes were incredibly high. The undead in this context were not random monsters. They were often integral, if sometimes dangerous, parts of the spiritual ecosystem, requiring careful management and understanding. It's like dealing with a complicated spreadsheet. But the numbers are actually human lives and cosmic consequences. The roots of the modern zombie, however, are a bit more convoluted. A fascinating amalgamation of ancient spiritual beliefs and later cultural anxieties. While we briefly touched on the Haitian voodoo zombie, a reanimated corpse without a soul, enslaved by a sorcerer, this concept, distinct from the flesh-eating ghouls of today, emerged from the brutal realities of slavery and loss of self. Yet, its existence planted a seed the dead, in some form, can return simultaneously in medieval Europe. Tales of revenants, actual physical corpses that clawed their way out of graves, often bloated and spreading disease, much like the Walking Dead of plague-ridden villages kept the fear alive. These weren't mindless, they were often malevolent, driven by unfinished business or a thirst for life. The beliefs of the Mesoamerican culture show a sophisticated understanding of death that goes far beyond a simple good versus evil dichotomy. The entities that could be considered undead were often powerful, sometimes dangerous, but rarely without purpose within their complex spiritual frameworks. Whether they were the Chihuatateo descending to cause mischief, or lost souls wandering Mictlan, they were manifestations of a world where death was a vibrant, often terrifying part of life. You can almost hear the distant rhythmic drumming, a pulse that resonates through the very fabric of their world, reminding you that even in death, there is a powerful, persistent energy. An obscure detail in the evolution of the zombie archetype is that early 20th century Western popular culture, particularly in the 1920s and 30s, often portrayed zombies not as flesh-eating monsters, but as hypnotized, enslaved individuals, directly influenced by distorted accounts of Haitian voodoo. Before George Romero's Night of the Living Dead in 1968 redefined them as mindless, cannibalistic hordes driven by instinct alone, a departure that truly cemented their modern image. So, for a while, the scariest thing about a zombie was not that it wanted your brains, but that it might make you do its laundry. Thankfully, Romero realized that brains were a much more marketable objective. You leave the vibrant, incense-laden air of Mesoamerican city-states, the rhythmic drums fading behind you, and ascend dramatically into the thin, biting air of the South American Andes. The landscape shifts from verdant jungle to rugged, towering peaks, their summits often capped with eternal snow. Here, the sky feels closer, the air cleaner, and the silence profound, broken only by the whistle of the wind or the distant bleating of llamas. You find yourself amidst ancient civilizations like the Inca, the Wari, and the Chachapoya, who saw their mountains not just as formidable barriers but as sacred beings, sources of life, and powerful connections to the divine. The academic debate that continues to fuel fascinating discussions is whether the modern zombie's ubiquitous popularity reflects a primal, cross-cultural fear of contagion and the breakdown of social order, or if it is primarily a contemporary allegory for anxieties about consumerism, global pandemics, environmental collapse, or even technology-driven dehumanization, merely utilizing ancient fears as a narrative framework. Are we afraid of what they are, or what they represent about us? It's like asking if you're truly scared of the clown, or if it's just a stand-in for your general discomfort with unsettling makeup and questionable balloon animal skills. The common historical fact that profoundly shaped the spiritual landscape of these Andean cultures is that ancestor veneration, particularly through the practice of mummification, was a cornerstone of their religious and social life, with the mummified remains of royalty and revered individuals, Malquid and Quechua treated as living members of the community. You feel the chill of the altitude, the sheer scale of the mountains dwarfing you. These weren't mere relics. They were active participants in ceremonies, consulted for advice, and even paraded through the streets. Imagine your great-great-grandparent still sitting at the dinner table, offering opinions on your life choices. It probably felt a bit like that, just with less small talk and more solemn ritual. Consider the vampire, another quintessential undead figure. Its lineage stretches back to various ancient beliefs in blood-drinking demons, spectral entities that drain life force, and the European revenant, particularly in Slavic folklore where tales of the Vrikolakas or Upir involved corpses that preyed on the living, consuming blood or life essence. These fears were often intertwined with real-world anxieties about disease, epidemics, and unexplained deaths. If a family member suddenly wasted away, or cattle mysteriously died, perhaps it was the unquiet dead, literally consuming the life of the village from beyond the grave. You might be standing in a high-altitude funerary complex, a chulpa perhaps, a towering stone structure built to house the mummified dead, perched precariously on a cliff edge, overlooking a vast valley. The silence here is immense, broken only by the wind whispering secrets through the ancient stones. The people of the Andes believed in a cyclical universe, where life and death were deeply intertwined. The ancestors, far from being gone, had simply transitioned to another state of being, a powerful intermediary between the living and the gods. Their continued well-being was essential for the prosperity of the community, ensuring fertile fields, abundant rains, and success in warfare. The concept of a curse or an unfulfilled spiritual contract still echoes in tales of the undead. Ancient oaths sworn over graves carried immense weight. To break them invited spiritual retribution. Today, we see this in horror films, where disturbing an ancient burial site unleashes a mummy's curse, or violating a sacred pact summons a vengeful spirit. The retribution shifts from spiritual decay to physical horror, but the root cause, a breach of respect for the dead, remains constant. It's like a really, really strict spiritual landlord. If you don't pay your respects, they might just evict your soul. This profound reverence, however, came with a crucial flip side: the fear of the unquiet dead. While most Malqui were benevolent, guiding forces, a neglected, disrespected, or improperly managed ancestor could become a malevolent force, bringing misfortune, illness, or even widespread disaster. Their presence was a constant, almost palpable energy, and ensuring their continued satisfaction was a delicate, lifelong task for the descendants. You can almost feel the weight of this spiritual responsibility, a quiet hum in the rarefied air. Our modern fascination with the undead also stems from our relentless pursuit of immortality and our deep-seated discomfort with decay. Ancient cultures, with their elaborate burial rituals and mummification practices, were, in their own way, trying to cheat death, or at least control its aftermath. The undead represent death's stubborn refusal to be contained, its ability to leak back into the living world, often in grotesque and terrifying forms. They remind us that for all our advancements, death remains the ultimate unconquered frontier, An obscure detail of Andean funerary practices that touches on the concept of the undead is the periodic renewal of the malquis, where they would be brought out from their tombs, cleaned, redressed in fine textiles, offered food and drink, and sometimes even have their hair combed or their nails trimmed. This wasn't just a show of respect, it was an active engagement with the deceased, treating them as if they still had physical needs and could observe their living descendants. Imagine it like a terrifyingly quiet family reunion, where everyone is on their best behavior, hoping the guest of honor doesn't start to smell funny. Even the simple act of remembering, that symbolic consumption of ancestral legacy we discussed, has its dark inverse. If memory is sustenance for the ancient dead, then to be forgotten is starvation, turning the deceased into a hungry ghost, a lonely, lost spirit. In modern narratives, characters often find peace only when their story is told, or their killer found, echoing this ancient belief that recognition and resolution are vital for the departed to truly rest. Without it, they linger, a haunting presence. These rituals were not only about honoring the dead, but also about maintaining the integrity of the community and its connection to the supernatural realm. If these renewals were neglected, or if the malqui was somehow disturbed or angered, then the benevolent ancestor could transform into a source of dread. The malqui might not physically walk again like a true zombie, but their spiritual power could manifest as a chilling influence, crops failing, livestock dying, or an unexplained sickness sweeping through the village. The fear wasn't of a shambling corpse, but of a subtle, pervasive spiritual rot affecting everything. The technological age has given the undead new avenues. Online forums buzz with ghost stories. Digital art reinterprets ancient monsters, and virtual reality allows you to face horrors that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors. Yet, the underlying fear isn't of the pixels or the code. It's of the primal, unresolved anxieties about mortality that these new formats allow us to explore. It's like upgrading from a flip phone to a smartphone, but still only using it to send text to your spectral ex. The academic debate that frequently arises when discussing these Andean practices is whether the living status of the malqui was a literal belief in animated mummies, or if it was a sophisticated metaphorical representation of ancestral spiritual presence and continuity, wherein their agency was entirely spiritual and not physical reanimation. Were the Incas genuinely afraid of a grumpy mummy getting up and wandering around? Or was it more about the consequences of spiritual negligence? It's like discussing whether the spirit of the law literally has a spirit, or if it's just a way of talking about its fundamental principles. The nuances of ancient belief systems are always a linguistic tightrope. The undead also serve as powerful metaphors for societal ills. The zombie horde, for instance, can represent unchecked consumerism, the erosion of individuality, or the spread of an insidious ideology. The vampire, once a symbol of aristocratic decay, can now represent corporate greed or parasitic systems. By giving our fears a tangible, reanimated form, we can grapple with complex societal issues in a more visceral way. Consider the landscape itself. The Andes are dynamic, often violent, with earthquakes, volcanic activity, and harsh weather. These natural phenomena would have been interpreted as signs from the gods, or perhaps as the wrath of neglected ancestors. If the rains failed, or a landslide occurred, it wasn't just bad luck. It could be the malqui showing displeasure. This connection between ancestor well-being and environmental prosperity instilled a deep sense of urgency in their veneration practices. You can feel the rumbling earth, a constant reminder of forces beyond control. So, as the light begins to dim, and the stories of ancient fears settle into the quiet corners of your mind, remember that the horrors we conjure today are not entirely new. They are the latest iterations of humanity's eternal struggle with death, loss, and the unknown. From the meticulously broken objects in a prehistoric grave to the shambling horde on your screen, the essential belief persists: some part of us, some essence of life, just might refuse to stay buried. The very process of mummification in the Andes was often natural, aided by the cold, dry air of the high altitudes, but it was also enhanced by human intervention, including evisceration and drying. This meticulous preservation aimed to keep the body intact, because an intact body was believed to retain the essence of the individual, allowing their spirit to maintain a stronger connection to the living world. A damaged malquai, or one improperly prepared, could lead to a fragmented spirit, potentially becoming restless and malevolent. It's like building a spiritual phone line. You want the connection to be crystal clear, not full of static or dropped calls. It's a comforting thought, in a strange, slightly chilling way, that even when the lights go out and the whispers of history fade, some parts of the past, like ancient fears, never truly die. They just put on new clothes and shamble into the next generation. The Cholpas, those stone towers, often had very small entrances, sometimes facing east towards the rising sun. This wasn't just for security. It was part of the ritual architecture designed to ensure the Malqui remained properly interred while still being able to observe the world. If a Cholpa was disturbed, or if its contents were plundered, a common occurrence after the Spanish conquest, it was seen as a profound violation, risking the unleashing of an angered ancestral spirit upon the living. The wind whistles through the cracks in the stone, carrying a faint, unsettling sigh